I would like to ask Gábor Schweitzer, who is giving his remarks to this topic, to take the floor.
Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues, first of all, let me thank the invitation to this conference for the organizers. And also I have to apologize that that the co-author of this presentation, Professor Iván Halász, cannot join us today. So I'm going to be the speaker. The title of this presentation is The Historical Constitution of Hungary as a Symbol. In this very short presentation, we would like to highlight two questions. We intend to talk about what the concept of historical constitution meant in Hungary in a historical perspective, on the one hand, and we would like to point out what possible symbolic messages historical constitution has transmitted from the past to the present, on the other hand. Constitutions can be divided into two basic types in formal terms. Codified written constitutions on the one hand, and uncodified historical constitutions on the other. The distinction between the two types of constitutions seems to be relevant from the turn of the 18th and 19th centuries, from the emergence of written constitutions in a modern sense. Until the adoption of Act 20 of 1949 on the Constitution of the Hungarian People's Republic, Hungary had an uncodified constitution. In the interwar period, and of course even before it, historical constitution was considered by public lawyers to be a construction dating back many centuries, some argued 1,000 years, and shaped by a varying composition of basic laws or cardinal laws and by constitutional customary law. That made it difficult to identify the basic tenets of the historical constitution, as they were not set out in a constitutional charter, but according to the literature of the time, this was that gave the flexibility of the historical constitution in relation to the codified written constitutions, which were seen as rigid and inflexible. Act 20 of 1949, adopted on the model of the Constitution of the Soviet Union, adopted in 1936, at most formally exhausted the concept of a constitution. During the period of regime change in 1989-1990, Hungary didn't adopt a new constitution in a formal sense, but incorporated the principles and basic institutions of rule of law and democracy into Act 20 of 1949 by means of constitutional amendments. In formal terms, Hungary received a new constitution with the adoption of the fundamental law in 2011. However, with the adoption of the fundamental law, there is an increasing interest towards the characteristics of the historical constitution in Hungary for obvious reasons. The national avowal of the fundamental law, which serves as the preamble to this constitution, refers several times to the historical constitution and the achievements of the historical constitution, which is a new term in constitutional theory in Hungary. Let me just quote the resolutions of the national avowal. So, we respect the achievements of our historic constitution and the Holy Crown, which embodies the constitutional continuity of Hungary and the unity of the nation. Secondly, we honor the protection of our identity rooted in our historic constitution is a fundamental obligation of the state. And the third one, we do not recognize the suspension of our historic constitution due to foreign occupations. By foreign occupations, the legislator meant the Nazi occupation of Hungary the spring 1944, and later on the occupation by the troops of the Soviet Union from the beginning 1944, 1945. So among the provisions of the fundamental law, Article 3 refers to the acquis of the historical constitution. Let me quote: "The provisions of the fundamental law shall be interpreted in accordance with their purposes, the national avowal, and the achievements of our historic constitution." It's interesting that the exploratory memorandum of the proposal for the fundamental law in 2011 pointed out that the fundamental law is Hungary's first unified democratic written constitution and fits into the 1,000-year history of the Hungarian constitution. With the adoption of the fundamental law, a new type of constitution has been created in Hungary, which could be called a hybrid constitution. This construction can be considered hybrid not only in the sense that a written constitution has been inserted into a historical constitution that existed in the past, but also in the sense that during the authentic interpretation of the fundamental law by the Constitutional Court must also take it into account the achievements of the historical constitution as an interpretative aid. The Constitutional Court has to find out which institution of the period of the historical constitution is to be considered as a guide during the process, the interpretation of the current constitution. To what extent can Hungary's historical constitution be considered a symbol? Constitutions can typically become symbols in two general ways. Written constitutions may declare themselves to be the end of a constitutional era or the beginning of a new era of constitutional law and thus become a symbol. It is possible, however, that some constitutions may receive a symbolic meaning through the language of interpretation. This latter process of symbolization is typical of historical constitutions, in our opinion. The symbolic institutions of the historical constitution of Hungary were already drawn attention by the representatives of Hungarian public law of the civil period. Professor Géza Ferdinandi, in his volume entitled The Public Law of Hungary, published in 1902, called the Holy Crown, as one of the basic institutions of the historical constitution, the symbol of the supreme power of the state. Some decades later, Professor István Egyed, he was a professor of public law in Budapest, in his book entitled Our Constitution, a mi alkotmányunk, published in 1933, regarded the Holy Crown as the mystical personification of Hungarian statehood and the symbol of constitutional kingdom. The Holy Crown, however, was not only used as the sovereign's badge of sovereignty during the period of historical constitution. The so-called doctrine of the Holy Crown was the starting point of a monarchical theory of sovereignty based on public law in Hungary. According to this doctrine, the Holy Crown itself was regarded as the source of public power. In other words, the Holy Crown was the depository of sovereignty. According to a well-known legal historian, Professor Ákos Timon, it is, let me just quote his opinion, It is the mystery of the Holy Crown that the Hungarian nation is united with the emperor within the Holy Crown. This opinion was written by him. You may read it also, 1907. Okay, so in this approach, the Holy Crown and the doctrine of the Holy Crown do not appear as a symbol of statehood in a general sense, but as a symbol of a specific monarchical statehood. During the interwar period, public lawyers identified Hungarian statehood as a monarchical statehood. They couldn't have identified it with anything else, of course. Obviously, it cannot be a coincidence that in the republican periods of Hungarian statehood, as in the so-called First Republic at the turn of 1918 and 1919, and during the so-called Second Hungarian Republic between 1946 and 1949, the national coat of arms, contrary to former periods of statehood, didn't include the Holy Crown as the symbol of the state. What possible conclusions can we draw from what has just been said? Having opened the doors widely towards the idea of a historical constitution, the fundamental law has broken down the dividing wall between constitutional law and constitutional history. This may even blur the boundaries between the constitutional law and the repealed norms and institutions of the period of historical constitution. Before the Second World War, even advocates of the construction of the historical constitution admitted that the basic tenets of the historical constitution were difficult to discern because of its lack of codification. In order to ensure legal certainty and to avoid ambiguity, it's essential that the basic principles of the constitution, of any constitution, should be codified and recognizable. The basic ideas and institutions of historical constitution in Hungary were intertwined with monarchical statehood in several respects, which are incompatible with republicanism and with the popular sovereignty-based constitutional order of our times. Hungary's historical constitution is an integral part of Hungarian history, including its norms, institutions, and ideas as well. The historical constitution of Hungary, as a construction, typically symbolizes the ideas and institutions of constitutionally obsolete eras. The authentic interpretation of historical constitution can be made, according to our opinion, within the framework of constitutional history in the light of the specific circumstances and the given period. So many thanks for the opportunity and for your attention. Thank you very much.